just want to go back to this story of the Buddha, which I've talked about a couple of times before, in which the Buddha is met on the road and he appears transformed. This is after he achieved enlightenment. And there's something visible about that transformation that causes people to have their attention drawn to him in a very particular way, and not in a way that they can describe as well, not they can describe in any terms at all, really. They just find him remarkable to look at. And I'm choosing to characterize that as something like presence or charisma. As I say, I don't think there's anything magical about that, or I'm choosing not to look to magical explanations for that. I'm looking at the possibility of there being purely physical, kinesthetic properties of his behavior, which is causing it to be attractive in this particular way. There is something about the way he's holding himself, the way he's moving, this kind of state of physical being, which is charismatic, which appears charismatic. And I'm just looking for a kind of explanation for that, tentative explanation for that, in this phrase that he uses when he's asked whether he's a god, whether he's a man, or what is he. And his response to that, I think I've said before, is that he is awake. He says he's awake. And how I'm choosing to interpret that in terms of just kind of groping towards some logic around it, is that when he says I'm awake, I can't really believe that he's using that term in contradistinction to being asleep, because it's pretty obvious, really. I don't think we're encouraged to contrast his appearance with the appearance of sleepwalkers. We might be, but I don't think so. I think he's inviting us to compare his way of being to a state of dreaming. When he says he's awake, he says he's not dreaming, I think. By which I mean that quite often we have something going on in our minds which is unconnected to what's, apparently at least unconnected to what's going on in our bodies, what's going on in the environment in which we're embedded, and unconnected to the tasks that we're involved in, unconnected to the kind of maintenance procedures that we need to undergo to make sure what we're doing is correct. All those kind of things. All the time I'm wandering through this little woods in the Dartington estate here, for example. I'm thinking about, well, in this particular case, I'm thinking about Buddha. And I'm thinking about this story, and I'm thinking about presence. So large parts of my cognition are not involved in walking through this forest. So to that extent, large parts of my thoughts are elsewhere. And of course the most obvious moment in one's life when one's thoughts are clearly elsewhere is when one is dreaming. But I think dreaming is just a prototypical example of that. I think a lot of the time we spend a lot of our time with our cognition completely elsewhere, dreaming about other things, imagining other things, predicting terrible futures or fantastic futures, regretting or pleasuring in events in the past, imagining alternatives to what we could be doing right now, or alternatives to what we've done in the past, or possible alternative futures, making up horrendous revenge scenarios for people who slighted us, or thinking of fantastic things we can do for people who have occasionally been nice to us. I think we probably do that less, though, unfortunately. Or just engaging in conceptualization and thinking for the pleasure or the alleviation of pain that it might bring. But again, all of it unconnected. I should just say here, this is completely by the by, but I've just walked through a patch of wild garlic. And so the smell of the place where I am now is really garlicky. It's fantastic, actually. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, I'm talking about dreaming. So a lot of the time, clearly, our thoughts are elsewhere. Our bodies are in one place and our thoughts are somewhere else, metaphorically speaking. And that's most clearly evident in dreams, but is also there most of waking life as well. It's very rare that we're in the flow of lived experience. And I think the Buddha is hinting at that. I think when he says he's awake, I think he means he's exactly in that moment, and he's involved in what he's doing, even if it's just walking down the road, looking at the sky, talking to the chap who's approaching him. But the relationship, what's the relationship between that, I'm guessing, and physical appearance, and the kind of physical state that he's in that gives him this appearance of this charismatic appearance? What is it about being, let's say, mindful of what one is doing and not dreaming that makes one adopt a certain physical state? And I'm really clutching at straws with this one, but it seems to me quite likely that that a lot of the things that we think about, a lot of the cognition that we're engaged in, shows on the surface of the skin. I've talked before about the surface of the body being a kind of the surface of a pool showing ripples, or I've talked about it as a screen in which you can kind of see the flickers of the electronic signals that are going on behind the scenes. And I think that's true a lot of what's happening in the body. Certainly, if I am thinking about something which gets me angry, if I am thinking about one of those revenge scenarios that I mentioned a little while ago, if I attend to it, I can feel biochemical things happening in my body. I can feel my pulse rate changing. I can feel my skin flushing at times. There's lots of little things going on, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of those show up on the outside. Probably quite subtle ways. They probably modulate the speed I'm speaking, or they alter my eye gaze direction, or they change the dilation of the pupils in my eye, or they put a slight tremor in parts of my voice, or they make me walk a certain way, or they just change the angle of my head, or the tension of the muscles around my shoulders. Lots and lots of little physical changes, which, although might not be consciously visible, I'm sure are visible to another human being, given that we are uniquely attuned to read those kind of signals from one another. So how does that connect up to this Buddha story? Well, I guess if you're not engaged in any of those kind of things, if you are, as Buddha claimed to be, fully awake, not dreaming, his mind is not elsewhere, no part of his mind is engaged in revenge scenarios or anything else, or memories or predictions of the future. He is purely engaged in the physical activity, fully mindful of the physical activity he's engaged in, then all of his body will seem to be engaged in that. There'll be no competing signals, there'll be no conflicts visible, there'll be no uncertainties about his movements, there will be no complex overlaps of different kinds of signals. It would be uniquely organized. And that's probably quite attractive. That's probably quite interesting to look at. Not interesting, perhaps. I think it would be probably unidentifiable as a thing. You would probably just get the impression of, wow, this person is really here. You would probably just get it as an impression. You wouldn't get it as a conscious thought. You'd probably think, wow, this person is really doing what they're doing. They're really not doing anything else. They're really not thinking about anything else. They are purely engaged in this activity of walking along this road, of looking at this sky, and of talking to me about being awake. So that's the kind of dots I'm trying to join up, but it's purely speculative. To do with being present, to do with presence of mind, to do with mindfulness, and how mindfulness manifests itself in terms of physicality, and the readability of that physicality from an objective outside point of view as uniquely attractive.